A few heart references in the Odyssey by Homer, pages 181 through 240, 2025 U Chicago Press edition. Today is Thursday, 4 June 2026 AD, and here I, Tanis, she, her, hers of Seattle, talk through a few heart references in the Odyssey by Homer, pages 181 through 240. Initial text by Homer, approximately 8th century B.C., specific book/edition, The Odyssey by Homer, translated by Daniel Mendelsohn, 2025, the University of Chicago Press edition, hardcover, ISBN in the video description. This is inspired by my cardiology self-experimentation. Cardiology is study of the heart, and the organ, and the blood system, at least for me. So for these notes, pages 181 through 190, I read yesterday, Wednesday, 3 June 2026 AD, and pages 191 through 240, I read today, Thursday, 4 June 2026 AD. These are part of my notes from reading The Odyssey by Homer for the second time. There's a fair amount of stuffs, so here we go. I watched out for heart stuffs, invoking the art of war, and the Iliad style/approach. Page 181, before that, I go quote, end quote, that's the text, and then what comes after it, or not in the quote, is my stuff. Okay. So, page 181, quote, heartening meal, end quote, food that fed the heart. Page 181, quote, drink to his heart's content, end quote, drink to feed/fill the heart. Page 182, quote, heartening feast, end quote, food that fed the heart even in ceremony. Page 183, quote, enjoyed these games to their heart's content, end quote, multi-sport games filled the heart. Page 183, quote, sweep all those cares from your heart, end quote, carefree desired for competition and multi-sport games. Page 184, quote, fired up the heart that beats in my breast, end quote, animated heart and multi-sport games context. Page 184, quote, your words have bitten my heart, what you've said has riled me up, end quote, sharp words could hurt the heart in sport performance. Page 185, quote, lighthearted, end quote, to set ambiance in sport competition. Page 185, quote, heart and courage compel him, end quote, heart compulsion in sport competition. Page 187, quote, filling his heart with awe, end quote, dance competition and multi-sport games imparted awe to the heart. Page 187, quote, the tale which broke his heart, end quote, tale in song and sports/bedroom context went with heartbreak. Page 188, quote, heart eaten up by sorrow, end quote, heart corrosion. Page 190, quote, heart was filled with delight as he listened, end quote, heart happy from/by acoustics. Page 190, 193, heart, quote, heart rejoicing, end quote, or similar, such as, quote, glad in his heart, end quote, heart happy. Page 192, quote, heart was filled with joy when he saw, end quote, heart happy from/by sight. Page 192, 216, 221, 235, quote, great-hearted, end quote, male non-Odysseus descriptor. Page 194, quote, great-hearted, end quote, female god descriptor. Page 194, quote, heart-wrenching anguish, end quote, like heart-tugging feel. Page 195, 209, quote, overwhelmed his heart, end quote, or similar, such as, quote, heart of mine burst, end quote, could be too much for the heart. Page 196, quote, heart desires, end quote, heart can want. Page 196, 211, 234, 235, quote, fill your heart, end quote, or similar, such as, quote, heart became even more enraged, end quote, heart could hold stuffs. Page 196, quote, dear to your heart, end quote, soft spot. Page 196, quote, heart has been moved, end quote, heart appeal. Page 198, quote, could never persuade the heart within my breast, end quote, physical heart not persuaded. Page 199, 200, 214, 217, 2 times, 219, 220, 224, quote, heart heavy with grief, end quote, or similar, such as, quote, heart was heavy, end quote, emotion laden. Page 199, 219, 229, quote, hearts eaten up by fatigue and by our sorrows, end quote, or similar, such as, quote, wear out the heart, end quote, heart tired. Page 201, 224, quote, hearts are set on sailing, end quote, or similar, heart set action, emphasis, conditioning. Page 202, quote, game to our heart's content, end quote, food type, wild animal / game to feed / fill the heart. Page 204, 221, 231, quote, hearts in our breasts were shattered, end quote, or very variations such as, quote, there, quote, end quote, physical heart felt broken. Page 205, quote, pitiless heart, end quote, 2 times. 208, Hades, per the Iliad. Page 205, 239, quote, heart ordered it, end quote, or similar, such as, quote, my heart urged me, end quote, heart compulsion. Page 206, quote, great-hearted mind, end quote, brain descriptor. Page 206, quote, depths of my heart, end quote, low in heart location. Page 210, quote, heart of mine, end quote, self-possession. Page 212, quote, great-hearted, end quote, descriptor of spirit. Page 216, quote, deep in my innocent heart, end quote, aorta, question mark, reference. Page 217, quote, hearts astounded, end quote, like a shock. Page 219, quote, deep in my heart and mind, end quote, low location shared. Page 221, quote, proud-hearted, end quote, Cyclops descriptor. Page 222, 226, quote, in his heart he foresaw, end quote, or similar heart foresight emphasis, heart prediction linkage. Page 224, quote, thoughts swirling around my heart, end quote, heart preoccupied. Page 225, quote, heart honey-hearted, end quote, alcohol descriptor. Page 226, quote, then Circe bade me eat, but the meal did not please my heart, end quote. Coerced meal did not look good, / food not appealing in presence of particular other. This is a good one for me, my taste. Okay. My cardiology self-experimentation. Page 226, quote, eating your heart out but not touching your food or your drink, end quote. Homer took great care to communicate food / drink, not only heart fuel. Page 227, 229, 2 times, 231, quote, manly heart within me, end quote, or similar, plurality, might be a little different, male self-descriptor of physical heart. Z. Page 227, 239, quote, in their hearts they felt, end quote, or variant such as, quote, pain in my heart, end quote, heart could feel. Page 228, quote, until you take heart once again, till those hearts within your breasts, end quote, repeating physiology process. Page 228, quote, disheartened, end quote, or, quote, quote, disheartened, end quote, and, quote, nor can your hearts ever be cheered, end quote, strong depletion. Page 229, quote, nor did my heart any longer, end quote, heart gave up, perhaps weak mind, not the physical heart, or he would have died. Page 234, end quote, Page 234, quote, hearts were new to sorrow, end quote, sorrow not inherent to heart. Page 236, quote, who has nursed a grudge in his heart, end quote, nurturing. Page 238, quote, heart as steadfast as ever, end quote, steadfast, persistent heart quality. Page 239, quote, tender-heartedness, end quote, soft, heart-like approach. And I've got a lot more to read, though it's 451 through the end of the work, so we're over halfway.